The hill lay quiet, untouched by time, covered in golden grass that waved lazily under the afternoon sun. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and the only sign of life was a girl walking slowly with a basket, her boots kicking up dust. Her name was Elara. Barely 22, she lived alone in the farmhouse her grandfather had built, tending to crops, chickens, and silence. The village below spoke little of her, and she preferred it that way. Each morning began with the sound of birds, not voices. Elara rarely ventured beyond the fence line unless she needed supplies or seeds. To her, the solitude was a sanctuary, a world of quiet routines and conversations only with wind and soil. The earth responded to her touch like an old friend, and the sun never felt cruel. Her only companions were a stray dog she'd named Moss and the whispers of the wild. Yet, beneath that quiet exterior, Elara carried grief. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was just 16, and her return to the farm had been both an escape and a burden. Since then, she had spoken to almost no one, her voice growing softer over the years, until silence became her armor. But silence, she would soon learn, can be broken without warning. It began on a Tuesday. She was inspecting the fence on the eastern ridge when she saw it, a dark shape lying still near the edge of the cliff. Her heart skipped. A body? An animal? With cautious steps, she approached. It was a man, tall, unconscious, and covered in dust and scratches. His breathing was shallow. She crouched beside him, unsure whether to run or help. And then, for the first time in months, she spoke. "Hey, are you alive?" Elara dragged the man across the grass, gritting her teeth as his weight fought her every step. Her body trembled, but from the storm of thoughts running through her mind. Who was he? What was he doing here? No one ever came this far up the hill. No one ever got lost here. It wasn't on any tourist map. The land itself seemed to hide from outsiders. But now, an outsider had arrived, uninvited and unconscious. She placed him on the old cot in the barn, where the air was cool and filled with the scent of dried hay. Her hands, used to sowing seeds and pulling weeds, now wiped sweat from a stranger's brow. She crushed leaves of mountain mint into water and pressed it gently to his lips. He groaned faintly. His face was bruised, his suit torn. Elara studied him. Short black hair, olive-toned skin, strong jawline, not a hiker, but someone far removed from these fields. That night, unable to sleep, she sat outside among her plants. "Who are you?" she asked aloud, though no one answered. Her fingers trailed through lavender and thyme, grounding her as they always did. She often spoke to them, not out of madness, but as ritual, as comfort. And they responded, not with words, but by growing stronger, fuller. It was a bond built in silence. But now, something had changed. The hill felt watched. By morning, he was awake, groggy, confused, but alive. When he opened his eyes, they locked onto hers with a mix of panic and gratitude. "Where am I?" he croaked. His voice was deep but cracked with thirst. Elara hesitated, her own voice nearly lost from disuse. "Safe," she whispered. "You're safe. Don't speak too much." She didn't want to ask more. Not yet. For now, she let the quiet answer what words could not. The man slept most of the day. Occasionally he stirred and winced, clutching his ribs. Elara kept her distance, watching from the barn door with arms folded tight across her chest. She had wrapped his wounds in clean cloth, brought water, even left him slices of sourdough and jam on a tin plate. But she had yet to ask his name, and he hadn't offered it. There was something about him, something out of place, She could feel it in her gut, like a storm building behind the ridge. Later, as dusk began to settle, he tried to sit up. "Thank you," he said, voice still rough. "I don't remember falling or walking, just lights, then dark." Elara nodded slowly but said nothing. Instead, she handed him a mug of herb tea and turned to check the fence again. She didn't trust people. Trust had been broken too many times, especially when outsiders promised to help but only took. Still, something in her eyes softened each time she glanced back. As she made her way toward the ridge where she'd found him, the silence pressed in. The same ground where he had collapsed now held no trace of struggle, no torn branches, no signs of how he'd gotten there. Just the distant hum of insects and the soft rustle of wind. That part of the fence had been slightly open, unlocked, and no one ever left it open. She closed it firmly now, bolting it as the sky turned gray. If he had come from the valley, someone might be looking for him, or something worse. Back at the barn, she found him standing, unsteady but alert, examining the old maps pinned to the wall. "This is your land?" he asked. Elara nodded, still silent. He studied her with a look not of judgment, but of calculation, as if something had clicked in his mind. "You don't know who I am, do you?" She shook her head, and that made him smile, just faintly. "Good," he said. "That might be the only reason I'm still alive." He didn't give her a name that evening. Instead, he spoke in fragments. About a forest he didn't remember entering. About a meeting that had gone wrong. About headlights and cold air, and waking up to her face. Elara listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowed in thought. She wasn't frightened. Not yet. But her instincts whispered that this man hadn't simply gotten lost. He was running from something, or someone. And the silence of the hill had hidden him, at least for now. That night, the storm returned. Thunder rolled across the valley like distant drums. Elara made up a bed inside the house, though she still slept with one ear open. He lay on the couch, arms folded across his chest, staring at the wooden ceiling like it held answers. Before falling asleep, he asked softly, "Why did you help me?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Because you were broken," she said, "and broken things don't scare me." In the morning, he was already outside, barefoot in the garden, watching dew drip from sunflower leaves. He smiled when he saw her. "You talk to them," he said. She nodded. "They listen." He crouched beside the basil patch and whispered something she couldn't hear. When he looked up, there was a boyish light in his eyes, one she hadn't expected. "Maybe they'll listen to me too," he said. It was the first time she laughed. Still, he hadn't told her his name. She noticed he avoided direct questions. Where he came from, who he worked for, what had brought him to the hill. But when she returned from the well with water and saw him staring at her family's old land deeds, something in her tightened. "This place," he said, "it's not on any map." She nodded. "That's how we keep it safe." He turned slowly, his voice low. "And that's why they want it." That afternoon, the sun dipped behind gray clouds, casting a dim light over the farmhouse. Elara and the stranger sat on the porch steps without speaking. The silence was no longer awkward. It had shifted into something mutual, respectful. Two people from different worlds, each holding wounds they hadn't yet dared to name. The wind moved through the tall grass below them, and for the first time, she noticed how he listened, not with impatience, but with reverence. He watched the land as if trying to memorize it. "This place, it feels like it breathes," he said finally. Elara nodded, eyes distant. "It does. You just have to sit still long enough to hear it." The moment was fragile. delicate as the wings of the moths that fluttered near the lantern by the door. It was the kind of silence she had lived with for years, but now it didn't feel lonely. It felt shared. And in that, there was unexpected comfort. She brought him soup later, and he ate slowly, methodically. No thanks, no questions. Just a calm between them that neither dared disturb. When he was finished, he helped her collect the chickens, gently guiding them into the coop like someone who had never held anything so alive. She watched him, curious. Not many men in suits knew how to move with such quiet grace, but then again, his suit no longer looked like it belonged to him. It hung off his frame like an old lie. That night when they parted, he stood at the door and paused. "I've been in boardrooms and penthouses, on private jets and across oceans," he said. "But I've never heard the world as clearly as I do here." Elara tilted her head. "That's because the noise hasn't caught up with you yet," she whispered. He nodded. "Let's hope it doesn't find me." And without another word, they closed their doors. Separate rooms, shared silence. He winced as he bent to lift a crate of apples. The bruises along his ribs had darkened, and every movement betrayed the pain he tried to hide. Elara noticed immediately, but said nothing. Instead, she handed him a poultice wrapped in linen, warm from the herbs she'd boiled that morning. He accepted it without argument, sitting on the bench beneath the fig tree while she returned to the chicken wire with pliers in hand. There was something deeper than bruised bone beneath his skin. She saw it in the way his eyes drifted when the wind blew, in the way he flinched at distant noises. It wasn't just injury, it was memory, trauma, a wound that couldn't be stitched or salved. Elara recognized it because she carried one too. They wore their pasts like invisible weights, and neither of them knew how to ask the other if it hurt to breathe. While he rested, she returned to the barn to sort through old tools. When she came back, he was staring at a photograph on the mantel, her parents on the day the last harvest came in before the accident. "They look kind," he said. "They were," she replied. Her voice was soft, but not sad. "They taught me how to listen before they taught me how to speak." He looked at her, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or envy. That night, under the stars, he finally asked, "What happened to them?" Elara didn't answer right away. She simply sat beside him and said, "Same thing that happens to everyone eventually. The world took them too early, and I stayed behind to make sure it didn't take this place too." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I know what that feels like," he murmured. She turned to him, quiet, steady. "No," she said. "You're just starting to find out." The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of morning that promised change. Elara walked through the garden with a tin pail in one hand and a tray of young lavender seedlings in the other. She knelt in the soil and began digging gently, her fingers moving with precision and care. Behind her, the man approached, holding a cup of coffee she had brewed for him, his first without asking. "Teach me," he said simply. She looked up, nodded, and handed him a trowel. He dug with uncertain hands, and the first seedling he placed was crooked. Elara gently reached over, adjusted it, and pressed the soil down with practiced ease. "Like this," she murmured. And again. By the third one, the seedling stood upright, framed in morning sun and soft shadows. "It's humbling," he admitted, sweat beginning to bead at his temples. "To plant something, not knowing if it'll grow." Elara smiled faintly. "That's how most good things begin." They worked side by side in near silence for hours, interrupted only by birdsong and the occasional laugh when he messed up a row. The air between them softened. With each seedling placed, some invisible barrier crumbled further. He was not the man who had stumbled out of the woods anymore. Here in the soil, among the lavender, he was someone closer to earth, less polished, more real. Later, as they stood admiring the neat rows they'd planted, he whispered, "You gave something to this ground, and it gave you peace in return." Elara nodded. "Everything is a conversation if you're willing to listen." He looked at his dirt-covered hands, then at her. "Maybe it's time I stopped talking and started listening too." It wasn't a declaration, it was a quiet vow. And the hill, as always, remained silent, but not deaf. That afternoon, while sorting through a stack of old mail on the kitchen counter, Elara's fingers brushed against an envelope she hadn't seen before. The logo in the corner made her breath hitch. Oranex Development Group. She knew the name. Everyone in the village did. They were the company behind the proposed dam that would flood not only the valley, but also the very hill her farmhouse rested upon. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a glossy flyer promoting sustainable energy through innovation. But behind the sleek language and green slogans, Elara saw what it truly meant: relocation, destruction, and silence not of peace, but of loss. Her hands shook. She remembered the town meeting last spring. Half the villagers hadn't even understood what was at stake. Most thought it was just more empty promises. But to her, it had always felt real. And now it was closer than ever. That evening, as the man stirred sugar into his tea, he caught sight of the flyer. His entire posture changed. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice no longer soft. Elara raised an eyebrow. "It was sent here, probably to remind me what's coming." His jaw tightened. He studied the paper with dark, knowing eyes, then set it down gently. "They shouldn't be contacting individuals directly," he muttered. "That's not how it's supposed to be handled." She tilted her head. "You say that like you know how it's supposed to be handled." His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. The porch creaked beneath the weight of the moment. "Because I do," he admitted at last. "I'm connected to Oranex." Elara's heart dropped. For the first time, she felt the hill truly shift beneath her feet, and the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was thunderous. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. His confession echoed through her like a storm circling without landing. Connected to Oranex? What did that mean? She replayed every word he had said over the past days, every pause, every glance at the land, every silence. It all took on a new shade. The man planting lavender with her might not have stumbled here by accident. And yet, her instinct said he wasn't lying, not completely. At dawn, she slipped out to the shed where her grandfather had stored old deeds, surveys, and letters, anything connected to the land. A locked metal box sat beneath a pile of rusted tools. She pried it open with a chisel and found folders brittle with age. One of them contained documents marked with smoke-stained edges, half burned as if someone had tried to destroy them. Among them was a contract, partially legible with the Oranex logo stamped in red ink. Her eyes scanned the pages until they froze on a name at the bottom: Raphael Lucian Hale. Not a company executive, the CEO, the founder, the man in her barn. The man with dirt under his nails and bruises on his ribs. The man who had never told her his name. Her hands clenched the paper, torn between fury and confusion. Had he come to deceive her? Or was he running from his own machine? She returned to the house slowly. He was there, sitting at the table, staring out the window. When she dropped the burned paper in front of him, he didn't flinch. He looked at it, then up at her. His voice was soft, tired. I didn't know this place had a face until I saw yours. Elara didn't speak. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. So, she said coldly, do you still plan to drown it? The storm arrived just before noon, sudden and unforgiving. Heavy rain lashed the fields, turning soil to mud and washing petals from the wildflowers that clung to the hill. Thunder rolled overhead like an old god awakening. Elara stood beneath the porch awning, arms crossed, eyes distant. Inside, Raphael sat at the kitchen table, the burned documents spread out before him like a confession no one had asked for, but that now demanded consequence. Lightning split the sky as he stepped onto the porch beside her, the smell of rain thick in the air. I didn't lie to you, he said quietly. Not entirely. She didn't look at him. You said nothing, she replied. That's still a kind of lie. He nodded slowly, accepting the weight of her words. I came here after walking away from everything. I was supposed to sign the final agreement that would greenlight the dam. I didn't. Instead, I disappeared. The wind picked up, whipping through the lavender they had planted together. Why this place? She asked. He hesitated, rain beginning to soak his shirt. Because the map had a name scribbled in pencil. Your family's. I wanted to see what we were about to erase. She finally looked at him. His face was open, unguarded. The storm had stripped away his polish, and all that remained was a man uncertain of who he truly was. And now that you've seen it? She asked. He stepped closer, rain cascading down his face like penance. Now I can't sign it. Not ever. Elara searched his eyes, looking for the old ruthlessness, the executive distance. It wasn't there. Only exhaustion and conviction. The storm raged around them, but for the first time since his arrival, something between them had cleared. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. And in that, something rooted itself, like a truth-breaking soil. The rain had softened by evening, dripping rhythmically from the eaves as the sky turned from slate to deep indigo. Elara sat on the porch swing, knees drawn to her chest, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Raphael stood at the railing, hands in his pockets, his soaked shirt now replaced by one of her grandfather's old flannels. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It was a waiting breath. I built a company on promises I never intended to keep, he said quietly, his voice barely above the rain. We branded destruction as progress. We told towns like yours that dams meant jobs, growth, security. But we never stayed long enough to see the silence that came after. Elara said nothing, but her jaw tensed. Her fingers tightened on the blanket. He continued. I didn't know the names of the people we displaced. I didn't think I needed to. He sat beside her slowly, not touching, just near. Then I got the report about this hill. There was a note attached. One of our interns had visited here, said it was too beautiful to destroy. I ignored it. But I couldn't forget it. So I came, not as a CEO, just as me. His breath caught. I didn't know I'd find you. I didn't know that silence could feel like truth. Elara turned toward him, eyes unreadable. And now? She asked. What do you hear? Raphael looked out at the valley below, the fields, the shadows stretching gently into night. I hear what I've been deaf to my whole life. Then he turned to her. And I want to stop the dam. I want to fix what I can, starting here. Elara studied him for a long moment. Words are easy, she whispered, but the hill remembers actions. Raphael nodded solemnly, then let it remember me differently. And for the first time, she didn't look away. They arrived 3 days later, just after sunrise. A black SUV kicked dust across the gravel road, tires crunching with a mechanical certainty that did not belong to the land. Elara watched from the garden, fingers still buried in soil, eyes narrowing as the vehicle stopped near the porch. 3 men stepped out, each dressed in near-identical gray suits, pressed and clean despite the dirt road. They moved like wolves in a place made for birds. Raphael stood at the top of the porch steps, shoulders squared. "No more hiding." "Hail," one of the men called out, sharp and formal. "You've gone dark." Raphael didn't flinch. "I didn't come here to be found." The man smiled tightly. "Too late for that." Elara rose slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She knew these men, not by name, but by presence. She had seen their kind before, people who carried power like a weapon and used silence to erase things. "We need your signature, sir," the second man said, holding out a tablet. "Delays are costing us millions. The board's patience is wearing thin." Raphael took the tablet, glanced at the glowing screen, then back at the men. "What happens to this hill if I refuse?" he asked, testing them. Then the matter escalates. Legal routes, forced sale, eminent domain. You know the process. He looked back at Elara. "I know the process," he said quietly. "But I've never stood on the land before." He handed the tablet back. "I'm not signing." The men exchanged glances. One of them chuckled under his breath. "You're tired, romantic. That place has gotten to you. But we both know this doesn't end with you." Raphael didn't move. "No, it ends with her," he said, nodding toward Elara. "She owns the deeds, she decides." The gray suits turned toward her now, 3 pairs of eyes calculating, dissecting. But Elara stood tall. "This hill isn't for sale," she said, and the porch fell into a silence that even the wind didn't dare disturb. The next morning dawned quieter, but the tension lingered in the air like the fog that clung to the fields. Elara stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs, her movements steady, though her mind raced. Raphael sat at the table, flipping through a weathered notebook filled with her grandfather's writings, crop cycles, weather logs, names of wild herbs. "He documented everything," Raphael murmured, "even the wind." Elara nodded. "He said silence spoke volumes, if you took the time to listen." When she placed a mug in front of him, their fingers brushed for a second. Brief, accidental, but charged. "You should leave," she said softly, eyes fixed on the steam rising between them. "They'll come back. They always come back." Raphael stared at the coffee, then at her. "So let them," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you ask me to." She didn't respond. Not in words. Instead, she pulled out a second chair and sat across from him. For the first time, their conversation drifted beyond the immediate threat. She told him about the village, how the well had dried up 3 summers ago, how the school had closed, how people were leaving because they felt forgotten. He listened, not with the clinical detachment of a businessman, but with the weight of someone beginning to understand the cost of his empire. "No one came to help," she said. "Not once. Until you showed up half-broken at my fence." He took a sip of coffee, then looked into her eyes. "Maybe I was meant to be broken. Maybe that's the only way I could see clearly." Elara tilted her head. "Coffee doesn't fix everything, you know." He smiled gently. "No, but it's a good place to start." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A shift in tone, in trust. Not a solution, but a pause in the storm. And in that pause, the silence felt like something new. Hope. Word traveled faster than wind in a place where silence was sacred. By midweek, the village below the hill had heard rumors that Elara had taken in a stranger, a man tied to the company threatening their land. Whispers filled the bakery, the post office, even the crumbling church that opened only for funerals now. Some wondered if she had betrayed them. Others hoped quietly that perhaps something was finally changing. Elara didn't flinch when the first knock came. It was Mara, her childhood friend turned schoolteacher, eyes sharp with concern. "Tell me it's not true," Mara demanded, "that he's not one of them." Elara stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "He was," she said plainly, "but he isn't now." Mara stepped back, skeptical. "That's not how it works." "It is," Elara replied, "when someone decides to burn the bridge they built themselves." By evening, a small group had gathered near the foot of the hill. Farmers, elders, the village's last mechanic. They didn't carry pitchforks or torches, just questions. Raphael met them with sleeves rolled up and dirt still on his hands from helping Elara repair a collapsed fence. "You can speak," one of the men said, "but we'll know if you lie." Raphael nodded solemnly. "I deserve that." And then he told them everything. He spoke of the contracts, the pressure from investors, the silence he had once called strategy. And he promised, on paper, in front of witnesses, to abandon the dam. But more than that, he asked to help them rebuild, not with money, not at first, but with presence, with effort, with action. Some eyes softened, others remained wary. But when old Mr. Calder offered him a worn leather glove and said, "We could use another pair of hands," the crowd didn't walk away. They stayed. And for the first time in years, the hill wasn't so quiet anymore. The schoolhouse stood half-swallowed by ivy and memory. Its roof sagged like tired shoulders, and dust coated the windows like forgotten pages. Elara hadn't been inside since she was a child, before the students stopped coming, before the desks were stacked in corners like abandoned dreams. But now, standing beside Raphael and the village elders, she saw it with new eyes, not as a relic, but as a promise waiting to be reopened. They walked the creaking floorboards slowly, their footsteps echoing through empty halls that once held laughter and lessons. "This place used to hold the heart of the village," Mara said quietly, tracing her fingers along a chalkboard still stained with faded writing. Raphael stood in the center of the room, silent, taking it all in. "What would it take to fix it?" he finally asked. "More than money," replied Mr. Calder. "It takes belief, and time, and someone who doesn't give up when the roof leaks." That afternoon, they cleared out the debris. Raphael climbed onto the roof with the mechanic, replacing tiles with more stubbornness than skill. Elara scrubbed windows until they shimmered. Children wandered up the hill with curiosity in their eyes, watching the work unfold like a story being rewritten. No grand speeches, no cameras, just hands doing what needed to be done. Sweat became the new language, and through it, trust began to grow. By sunset, they lit a small fire in the field outside. Families gathered with food and folded chairs. Raphael sat between villagers who had cursed his name just days before, sharing soup and stories under the darkening sky. Elara watched from the steps of the schoolhouse, heart full and uncertain. The silence had changed again. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with effort, with reconciliation, and with the first fragile notes of something that might, one day, be called home. A week passed, then two. No officials returned, no new contracts arrived, and the men in gray suits didn't come back. It was as if the threat had evaporated, but everyone knew it hadn't. It was simply quiet again, that waiting kind of quiet, the kind that settles before a decision is made behind closed doors. The villagers resumed their lives cautiously, like walking barefoot across broken glass, uncertain whether they were safe or simply being spared a little longer. Raphael spent most mornings repairing what years of neglect had worn down. He fixed shutters, reinforced barns, dug trenches where water lines had rusted. The villagers watched him, some still suspicious, others slowly softening. But he never asked for approval. He worked as though penance was not a gesture but a rhythm, day after day, hour after hour, earning trust in the same way a tree earns shade, quietly, gradually, rooted in effort. Elara found herself watching him more than she meant to. She noticed how he laughed with the children, how he listened when the elders spoke, how he paused before answering difficult questions. And one afternoon, as they shelled peas side by side, he told her what the board had decided. "They sent a letter last night. I resigned." She looked up, startled. "You walked away from your company?" He nodded, a strange peace in his eyes. "I built something that could destroy this, so I walked away before it could." That night, around the schoolhouse fire pit, Raphael stood and spoke. "This village taught me something I never learned in skyscrapers or strategy meetings. You don't save a place by owning it. You save it by becoming part of it." The villagers listened in silence, many blinking back disbelief. And then Mara stood, raised a glass of cider, and said, "To the dam that never came." A ripple of laughter followed, cautious and bright. And beneath the stars, the silence of the hill bloomed into something living. It started with a rumble, low, mechanical, unnatural. A sound the hill had never known. Elara heard it first from the cornfields, her eyes narrowing toward the tree line. Then came the glare of metal flashing in the distance. Trucks, bulldozers, drones. The machines hadn't forgotten. Even if Raphael had resigned, the system he helped build hadn't stopped. They were coming anyway, with or without his signature. Raphael stood at the edge of the property, fists clenched, watching the convoy make its slow, deliberate approach along the old service road. "They're here to test the soil," he muttered. "It's a loophole in the jurisdiction. If they claim environmental study rights, they can station equipment for weeks." Elara's voice was calm but cold. "And what comes after the study?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The villagers gathered near the road, many with folded arms and unreadable expressions. Mara held a clipboard. Mr. Calder carried an old radio. They weren't armed, but they were rooted. Raphael stepped forward, speaking directly to the survey team. "This land belongs to the village," he said. "Any tests require written consent from the registered stewards." The lead engineer, wearing mirrored sunglasses and a neon vest, replied flatly, "We have federal backing. You'll need to speak with the regional office." But they didn't move forward. Not that day. Not with 40 villagers standing silently between the machines and the field. The machines idled, puffing diesel smoke into the crisp mountain air. And when they finally reversed, one by one, the crowd remained still, like stones in a river refusing to yield. Elara didn't smile. She knew this wasn't over. But the land had spoken through its people, and even machines can hear when a place says no. That evening, Raphael sat alone on the porch steps, turning something over in his hands, a worn brown leather wallet. The stitching was frayed, the corners softened by time. It had once belonged to his father, a man who built empires but couldn't build a family. Raphael rarely spoke of him, but tonight, under the bruised twilight sky, he opened the wallet slowly, as if it might still hold a version of himself he'd forgotten. Inside was a photograph. 2 boys and a man in a navy blue suit standing beside a dam under construction. The edges of the photo were curling, the smiles stiff. Beneath it, a card from Oronex's founding year, signed in his father's looping, arrogant handwriting. "Power builds peace," it read. Raphael scoffed under his breath. "Power built silence," he murmured, and then called it peace. Elara, passing with a basket of herbs, paused when she saw him. "What is that?" she asked gently, sitting beside him without pressing. Raphael hesitated, then handed her the wallet. She looked at the photo, then at him. "Is this what made you build so much?" He nodded. "I thought if I could create more than he did, I could undo what he left behind. But all I did was expand the damage." Elara turned the photo in her hand. "You didn't just inherit his name, Raphael. You inherited the noise. And now you're choosing something quieter." He looked at her then, not with shame, but with gratitude. "I don't want this legacy," he said. "I want something different, something that grows roots, not walls." Elara nodded slowly. "Then you'll need to start by planting what he never did. Truth." She handed the wallet back. He didn't put it in his pocket. He left it on the porch beside her. A symbol, perhaps, of something finally set down. The community hall smelled of dust and old cedar, its windows fogged from the breath of 20 villagers gathered inside. They sat in a wide circle, not quite trusting the center. At the front, a wooden table had been cleared of hymnals and rusted tools. Now it held a single binder, thick, dog-eared, and marked, Land Stewardship Proposal, Draft. Raphael stood beside it, palms open, eyes steady. "This isn't a contract," he began. "It's a promise, written down." Murmurs stirred through the room. Elara watched from the back, arms crossed but heart thudding. This was the first time he had spoken in public as one of them. Not over them, not to them, with them. "The land stays yours," he said. "No sales, no leases. What I'm offering is resources, tools, training, renewable infrastructure, all placed under the village's control. We'll write bylaws together. I'll put up the funding, but the decisions come from here." A silence settled, deep and weighted. Mara flipped through the pages, lips pressed tight. "You're asking us to believe you after what your company did?" Raphael nodded. "I'm not asking for belief. I'm offering transparency. Monthly meetings, open books, every receipt printed if you want it. I know words have hurt you. Let actions speak louder." An elder stood, Mrs. Rios, nearly 90, blind in one eye, but sharper than anyone in the room. "And what do you want in return?" she asked. Raphael looked at the floor, then back up. "Peace," he said. "A life I'm not ashamed of." The answer was so quiet, it drew a stillness over the room. Then she nodded once, sat down and said, "Let's read it out loud." Page by page, they began. No votes, no shouting, just voices carrying across wooden beams, one line at a time. And the land just outside the window seemed to lean in and listen. The council met under the mulberry tree at the center of the village square, an unofficial tradition born of necessity and shade. There were no gavels or titles, just folding chairs, notepads, and weathered voices. Raphael sat among them, not at the head, but between Mara and old Mr. Calder, notebook open, pen in hand. It was the first time in the village's memory that someone with power came to listen instead of lead. Elara stood a few steps back, observing. She watched how he didn't interrupt, how he let silences stretch until someone else filled them. The topics ranged from crop rotation to the broken irrigation pipe near the South Ridge. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't talk about funding. He asked, "What do you need to stay here, to not feel forgotten?" That changed everything, because no one had ever asked them that before. They spoke of seed banks and apprenticeships, of reviving the old trade routes and bringing back the annual harvest fair. Mara mentioned a community library. Mr. Calder wanted to teach welding again. A beekeeper suggested a solar array. Every idea was scribbled down, nothing dismissed. When the sun moved past the treetop and the meeting ended, Raphael stood and said simply, "Let's build all of it, together." The villagers didn't applaud, they didn't cheer, but they didn't leave either. They stood in small clusters, talking, sketching ideas in the dirt with sticks, laughing at old stories. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The community was reassembling itself. Not because someone demanded it, but because someone had finally made space for it. And as the mulberry trees' leaves rustled above them, the village council, unofficial, unwritten, undeniable, took root in truth. Elara found the letter tucked between the pages of her grandfather's almanac, yellowed, unsealed, its edges curled like it had been waiting too long. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's. It was addressed not to a name, but to a corporation, Oranex Holdings, dated nearly 2 decades ago. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Raphael stood in the doorway, watching her face shift from curiosity to something deeper. Something cracked open. The letter wasn't angry, it wasn't desperate. It was a plea. Her father had written about the valley, about its fragile water table, the traditions tied to planting seasons, the oral histories passed through generations. "You'll look at this land and see potential for energy," it read. "But I ask you to see the energy already here. People, stories, soil that remembers footsteps." The letter had never been sent. He must have known it wouldn't matter, or maybe he just never had the chance. Elara sat in silence, the letter in her lap, her eyes burning. "He tried," she said softly. "He tried to speak before they even came." And no one listened. Raphael moved closer, knelt beside her. "I wish I could tell him I'm listening now." His voice cracked, not with guilt, but with something deeper, remorse. If he'd sent this, maybe none of this would have happened. Elara shook her head. "No, but maybe it's happening now because someone finally found it." She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the almanac. "We'll read it at the next council meeting," she said. "Everyone should hear his words." Raphael nodded, rising to his feet. He looked at her then, not as a stranger or a man with something to fix, but as someone allowed to stay. And outside, the hill rolled on in soft golds and greens, like nothing had changed, except everything had. It was the youngest of the villagers, a girl named Lenny, who brought the map. Barely 9 years old, she'd been exploring the attic of the old schoolhouse when she found it rolled behind a bookshelf, drawn on parchment, its edges brittle and ink faded. She ran all the way to Elara's porch, hair tangled, cheeks flushed with the urgency only a child carries. "It shows the hill," she said breathlessly, "but not like it is now, like it used to be." Elara and Raphael unrolled it carefully on the kitchen table. The map was hand-drawn, dated 1910, and marked with strange symbols, circles near springs, X's along ridgelines, and a spiral carved where the farmhouse now stood. "This isn't just topography," Elara whispered. "It's memory." Her grandfather had once said the land kept secrets better than any man. This map seemed to prove it. "These marks," Raphael said, pointing, "they trace natural aquifers, untapped by the terrain." Together, they took the map outside, tracing the lines in real time. They found the old spring, buried under thickets, a forgotten wellhead beside an elm tree, the remnants of stone boundary markers swallowed by tall grass. It was like uncovering a second layer of the hill, a hidden language of survival and connection. "This is what the studies never saw," Raphael murmured, "because no one thought to ask a child, or a hill." That evening, Lenny sat at the council meeting with her chin held high, the map spread wide across the floor for all to see. The villagers gathered around, pointing, gasping, remembering. Someone had drawn this not just to navigate, but to protect. "This changes everything," said Mara. "We don't just own the land, we carry its story." And Elara, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, felt something settle deep within her. A root, a pulse, a beginning. The memory came uninvited, like a gust of cold air through a cracked door. Elara stood by the barn, watching Raphael mend the broken gate, when her gaze fell upon the fence post carved with old initials, JM plus RL. Her breath caught. That carving had been made the week before her father disappeared. She hadn't thought about it in years, had tucked the ache of that day into some quiet place. But now it came flooding back. She had been 6. Her mother was kneeling in the garden, humming, when the car failed to return. No note, no phone call, just absence. The townspeople whispered it was abandonment. Others said maybe the hill had taken him, swallowed him the way it swallowed stories. Her mother never spoke of it, never cursed him, just worked harder, smiled less. And Elara learned that silence could carry both dignity and wounds. Now, holding the old carving between her fingers, Elara turned to Raphael. My father didn't die. He vanished. He stopped working, eyes searching hers. You never found out why? She shook her head slowly. Only rumors. That he'd warned people about a land survey, that he got too close to something he wasn't supposed to know. She hesitated. He'd written letters to Orinex, letters no one read, except maybe someone did. Raphael's face went pale, haunted. Elara, he said carefully, what was his name? She told him, and he staggered back a step, as if struck. Your father was the whistleblower. His letters were part of the hidden files. They were scrubbed from our system, buried. Elara's mouth went dry. Then he was right to be afraid. The wind moved through the trees like an exhale from the past. And for the first time, they realized her father's silence hadn't been abandonment, it had been a warning. The map had shown a spiral drawn at the base of the hill, beneath the oak grove where Elara had often gone to think. She returned there now, Lenny's map folded in her pocket, Raphael at her side. The ground felt different beneath their feet, soft then hollow. As they stepped near the largest oak, Raphael paused. Listen, he said. Beneath the hush of wind in leaves, there was something else, the faintest echo, like breath moving through stone. They brought shovels. At first, it was just root and clay, but then an old iron hatch revealed itself beneath the roots, rusted, bolted shut. Your father knew, Raphael murmured. He marked it. With effort, they pried it open. A stairwell descended into earth, swallowed by shadows. Elara lit a lantern and stepped down, heart pounding, air thick with the scent of iron and time. Below, a small bunker revealed itself. Concrete walls, dust-covered equipment, shelves stacked with files in waterproof casings. Wires snaked across the ceiling like veins. A generator rested silent in the corner, dead from years of disuse. But the cabinets were filled with maps, letters, recordings. Documents stamped, confidential. It was her father's handwriting on many of them. Meticulous, urgent, written like a man running out of time. He was building a record, Raphael whispered, to expose them, to protect the land. And they buried it under the roots. Among the folders was a flash drive wrapped in wax paper. Raphael slipped it into his pocket. This isn't just history, he said. It's leverage. Elara ran her hand across a ledger labeled Names We Promised to Protect. She traced her father's signature at the bottom. He never left, she said softly. He stayed underground, watching, recording, warning. This hill didn't take him, it held him, so we could finish what he started. and above them, the roots curled tighter into the earth, guarding their secret. The next morning, Raphael left before the sun rose, the flash drive clutched in his hand like a relic. He didn't say goodbye, only left a note on Elara's windowsill. If this works, they won't be able to ignore us anymore. She watched his silhouette vanish down the ridge, past the orchard, swallowed by the same fog her father had once walked into. But this time, someone was carrying evidence, truth encoded, encrypted, and ready to rise. He traveled alone, without his name or his former title, to avoid interception. The capital loomed gray and indifferent as ever, but he wasn't looking for politicians. He found a reporter instead, an investigative journalist once silenced by legal threats. When she opened the flash drive, her face paled. "This is a blueprint of corruption," she said. "Environmental fraud, displacement data, suppressed reports, even bribery records." How long did he collect this? "Decades," Raphael answered, "until they made him disappear." She nodded grimly. "We'll publish everything, but be ready, this won't stay quiet." Within 48 hours, the story hit national media. Headlines screamed buried truth beneath billion-dollar dam project. The footage included satellite maps, testimonies, and scanned pages from the bunker, each one like a voice rising from underground, refusing to be forgotten. Back on the hill, Elara read every word from a worn tablet, villagers gathering behind her one by one. Some cried, others cursed, but no one looked away. When she reached the end, she closed her eyes. "He got his voice back," she whispered. Mara placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you opened the door." And in that moment, the land didn't just feel protected, it felt heard. Not by corporations, but by the world. The truck rolled up the hill at dusk, headlights off, dust in its wake. Elara was feeding the hens when she heard the engine, slow and familiar. She stood still, hands frozen over the grain bucket. Raphael stepped out before the engine fully stopped. He looked thinner, worn, eyes sunken from sleepless nights and the weight of too many truths told too quickly. But when he smiled, it wasn't the smile of a CEO. It was the quiet return of someone who'd finally earned his place. The villagers began to gather at the edge of the field. No speeches, no cameras, just presence. Raphael walked toward them, nodding, greeting each person by name. He thanked the mechanic for keeping the well pump running. He gave Mara a stack of donated school books. He handed Mr. Calder a new welding visor. But when he reached Elara, he stopped. "I brought something else," he said. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small, tattered notebook. Her father's notebook. "They had it in storage," he said softly. "Evidence, they called it. But I knew it was yours." Elara opened it with trembling hands, scanning pages filled with sketches of plants, warnings about the dam, and final notes that stopped mid-sentence. "He knew what they would do to him," Raphael continued, "and he kept writing anyway." Elara closed the notebook and met his gaze. "You brought him back," she said, voice breaking. "No," Raphael replied. "He never left. I just followed the map he left behind." Then, without ceremony, the villagers encircled them. Some hugged Raphael, some simply touched his shoulder. There were no questions, no fanfare, just a welcome that came not from forgetting who he had been, but from honoring who he had become. The prodigal didn't return with riches. He returned with truth. And in that, he brought something rarer than redemption, roots. It was a clear morning, the kind that seemed to hold its breath. Dew clung to every leaf, and mist curled like ribbons along the field's edge. The villagers gathered near the oak grove, where the bunker entrance had been sealed again. This time not in secrecy, but in ceremony. Elara stood beside Raphael, holding her father's notebook in one hand and the old map in the other. They hadn't called it a memorial, but everyone knew that's what it was. Children placed stones in a circle around the tree roots. Each stone bore initials, names of ancestors, lost farmers, silenced voices. Mara read aloud from the notebook, her voice steady even when it cracked. They will try to move mountains, but they will forget that mountains are made of us. The villagers listened, not as mourners, but as stewards. And when she finished, no one clapped, no one spoke, because the land had already said enough. Then, without warning, the wind shifted. It rose from the valley like a breath returning after being held too long. It moved through wheat and branches, through hair and silence. And then it howled, not violently, but deeply. The kind of sound that makes your ribs remember you're alive. A sound that wasn't wind at all, but something older. A voice made of earth. The villagers turned toward the hilltop as if summoned. Even the birds went still. Raphael looked to Elara. "Do you hear that?" She nodded slowly, eyes full. "It's answering us." And in that moment, it no longer mattered who had planted the seeds or unearthed the truth. What mattered was that the land had listened, and now it was speaking back, not with words, but with presence, with breath, with memory. And everyone who stood there felt it. They weren't just protecting the hill. The hill had chosen to protect them, too. It arrived in a plain envelope, postmarked from Washington. No stamp of urgency, no legal seal, just a weight that pulsed beneath its paper skin. Elara opened it beneath the mulberry tree, surrounded by villagers who sensed, somehow, what it meant. Inside was a 3-page notice from the Federal Land Commission. Proposal 17B, official termination of Project Wild Ridge Dam. Stamped, final, irrevocable. The fight, at least on paper, was over. Mara read the document aloud, each word cutting through the summer air like morning light through fog. In light of new environmental evidence and unrecoverable legal breaches, she read, the land in question will remain under protected local stewardship indefinitely. The final paragraph named Elara as the official guardian of the hill. Raphael stood quietly beside her, head bowed as if witnessing a prayer answered not by a god, but by persistence. Tears came, but no one called them weakness. They were earned. Lenny climbed into Elara's arms, clutching the old map to her chest. "You saved it," the girl whispered. Elara shook her head, voice trembling. "No, it saved us." Raphael unfolded a second paper, his resignation, now signed by the board and marked accepted. With it came a settlement fund, voluntarily redirected by a new board to repair what the company had threatened to destroy. "It's yours now," he told the village. "All of it, on your terms." That night, they lit lanterns all across the ridge, one by one, stretching from the schoolhouse to the far edge of the field. No fireworks, no speeches, just light, soft, warm, undeniable. And as the wind moved gently through the valley, carrying laughter, footsteps, the scent of wood smoke and thyme, the land exhaled again. Not in warning, not in sorrow, but in relief. Because something had changed, and this time it would stay. They planted the orchard in early autumn, when the air still carried summer's breath, but the earth had begun to harden with purpose. It wasn't done for profit nor tradition. It was a tribute. Each tree was planted in honor of someone lost, a father, a mother, a voice once silenced by greed or time. The first sapling, an apricot, was placed in the clearing where the bunker had once opened. Elara lowered it into the soil with her bare hands. Raphael covered its roots. There were no plaques, no speeches. Just the soft cadence of spades, the rhythmic press of soil, and the shared memory that bound everyone's hands to the earth. Children helped, elders directed. Even Mara, usually composed, let a single tear fall as she marked the spot for her brother's tree. And though no one said it aloud, they all understood. This orchard wasn't just for fruit, it was for remembrance, for healing, for becoming something that lasts. Raphael worked beside Elara silently until finally he asked, "Why apricots?" She smiled. "My father said they were the first trees to bloom, even when the cold hasn't fully left." He nodded. Hope before certainty. She looked at him then, not the way she had looked when he first arrived, lost and hidden, but as someone she saw clearly now. Someone still growing, like the roots beneath them. "And you?" she asked. "Why are you still here?" He glanced at the sapling between them. "Because this is the only place I've ever seen something break and grow stronger after." The orchard stretched out behind them, rows of life rising from silence, and in that stillness, something else took root. Not a contract, not a cause, but a home. For the first time, not inherited, not claimed, simply shared. Winter came gently that year. The first frost kissed the fields instead of scarring them, and the hill wore its quiet like a shawl. But it wasn't the silence of threat anymore. It wasn't the hush before loss or the quiet after betrayal. It was a silence of belonging, of something whole, breathing, protected. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled, only shared. Elara sat on the porch swing, wrapped in her father's old coat, watching Lenny and two other children trace paths between the orchard trees. The branches were bare, but full of promise. Raphael joined her, carrying 2 mugs of cider, his beard grown in, hair touched with winter. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They had learned each other's quiet. They had rebuilt not only land, but language, one rooted in presence, not performance. The village had changed. The schoolhouse reopened. The well ran clean again. The council met under the mulberry even in the cold, wrapped in scarves and thick laughter. And though the world beyond still buzzed and demanded, the hill remained still, firm beneath boots and memories. They had said no to a machine, and yes to themselves. That evening, as snow began to fall in soft, scattered silence, Elara leaned her head on Raphael's shoulder. "It's strange," she said. "I used to think silence meant no one was listening." He smiled. "And now?" She looked out over the land, the orchard, the fields, the homes. "Now I think it means everyone finally understands." And the hill, draped in white and memory, stood behind them like a witness, rooted, alive, home.